Hello, guys and gals, and this is part 6 of our reading of George Orwell's 1984. And as always, we're going to go over the copyright information. Also, there's a thing here. I don't know what's coming up next, but this book deals with some topics that I don't always agree with. And I want to say that up front. Anyway, this says all rights reserved, including the right to reproduce this book or portion thereof in any form. Anyways, but yeah, this is a book from a time, and there can be racism in here that I don't really agree with. There was especially some in the first 2 episodes, so I had to put that there. I'm not sure what's coming up ahead, but the book can also be very violent, and it's going to be some stuff that I probably don't really agree with. But anyways, let's go check this out. Now, right now, currently, he is in the canteen, and basically he was making up a story about Comrade Ogilvy in the previous episode. And his job was to basically write stories, basically make up people, and basically write the pasts, which is fascinating. Anyways, right now we are talking about Syme, his friend Syme, which is kind of... Syme doesn't really seem like a very friendly character. But anyways, we're going to go back up to here. We're going to start up here with, "Just the man I was looking for," said a voice at Winston's back. He turned around. It was his friend Syme, who worked in the research department. Perhaps friend was not exactly the right word. You did not have friends nowadays. You had comrades. But there were some comrades whose society was pleasanter than those of others. Syme was a philologist, a specialist in newspeak. Indeed, he was one of the enormous team of experts now engaged in compiling the 11th edition of the Newspeak Dictionary. He was a tiny creature, smaller than Winston, with dark hair and large, protuberant eyes, at once mournful and derisive, which seemed to search your face closely while he was speaking to you. "I wanted to ask you whether you'd got any razor blades," he said. "Not one," said Winston, with a sort of guilty haste. "I've tried all over the place. They don't exist any longer. Everyone kept asking you for razor blades. Actually, he had 2 unused ones, which he was hoarding up. There had been a famine of them for months past. At any given moment, there would be some unnecessary article which the party shops were unable to supply. Sometimes it was buttons. Sometimes it was darning wool. Sometimes it was shoelaces. At present, it was razor blades. You could only get hold of them, if at all, by scrounging more or less furtively on the free market. I've been using the same blade for 6 weeks, he said more untruthfully. The queue gave another jerk forward, and they halted. He turned and faced Syme again. Each of them took a greasy metal tray from a pile at the edge of the counter. "Did you go see the prisoners hanged yesterday?" asked Syme. "I was working," said Winston indifferently. "I shall see it on the flicks, I suppose." "A very inadequate substitute," said Syme. His mocking eyes roved over Winston's face. "I know you," the eyes seemed to say. "I see through you. I know very well why you didn't go see those prisoners hanged." In an intellectual way, Syme was venomously orthodox. He would talk with a disagreeable, gloating satisfaction of helicopter raids on enemy villages, the trial and confession of thought criminals, the executions in the cellars of the Ministry of Love. Talking to him was largely a matter of getting him away from such subjects and entangling him, if possible, in the technicalities of newspeak, on which he was authoritative and interesting. Winston turned his head a little aside to avoid the scrutiny of the large dark eyes. "It was a good hanging," said Syme reminiscently. "I think it spoils it when they tie their feet together. I like to see them kicking, and above all, at the end, the tongue sticking out there, and blue. A quite bright blue. That's the detail that appeals to me. Next, please, yelled the white aproned prole with the ladle. Winston and Syme pulled their trays beneath the grill. Onto each was dumped swiftly the regulation lunch, metal pannikin of pinkish gray stew, a hunk of bread, a cube of cheese, a mug of milkless Victory coffee, and one saccharin tablet. There's a table over there under the telescreen, said Syme. Let's pick up a gin on the way. The gin was served out to them in handleless china mugs. They threaded their way across the crowded room and unpacked their trays onto the metal-topped table. On one corner of which someone had left a pool of stew, a filthy liquid mess that had the appearance of vomit. Winston took up his mug of gin, paused for an instant to collect his nerve, and gulped the oily-tasting stuff down. When he had winked the tears out of his eyes, he suddenly discovered that he was hungry. He began swallowing spoonfuls of stew, which in among its general sloppiness had cubes of spongy, pinkish stuff, which was probably a preparation of meat. Neither of them spoke again till they had emptied their pannikins. From the table, at Winston's left, a little behind his back, someone was talking rapidly and continuously, a harsh gabble, almost like the quacking of a duck, which pierced the general uproar of the room. "How is the dictionary getting on?" said Winston, raising his voice to overcome the noise. "Slowly," said Syme. "I'm on the adjectives. It's fascinating." He had brightened up immediately at the mention of newspeak. He pushed his pannikin aside, took up his hunk of bread in one delicate hand and his cheese in the other, and leaned across the table so as to be able to speak without shouting. "The 11th edition is the definitive edition," he said. "We're getting the language into its final shape, the shape it's going to have when nobody speaks anything else. When we finish with it, people like you will have to learn it all over again. You think, I dare say, that our chief job is inventing new words, but not a bit of it. We're destroying words, scores of them, hundreds of them, every day. We're cutting the language down to the bone. The 11th edition won't contain a single word that will become obsolete before the year 2050. He bit hungrily into his bread and swallowed a couple of mouthfuls, then continued speaking with a sort of pedant's passion. His thin, dark face had become animated. His eyes had lost their mocking expression and grown almost dreamy. "It's a beautiful thing, the destruction of words. Of course, the great wastage is in the verbs and adjectives, but there are hundreds of nouns that can be gotten rid of as well. It isn't only the synonyms. There are also the antonyms. After all, what justification is there for a word which is simply the opposite of some other word? A word contains its opposite in itself. Take good, for instance. If you have the word like good, what need is there of a word like bad? Ungood. Ungood will do just as well, better, because it is an exact opposite, which the other is not. Or again, if you want a stronger version of good, what sense is there in having a whole string of vague, useless words like excellent and splendid and all the rest of them? Plus good covers that meaning, or double plus good if you want something stronger still. Of course, we use those forms already, but in the final version of Newspeak, there will be nothing else. In the end, the whole notion of goodness and badness will be covered in only 6 words. In reality, you only need one. In reality, only one word. Don't you see the beauty of that, Winston? It was BB's idea originally, of course, he added as an afterthought. A sort of vapid eagerness flitted across Winston's face at the mention of Big Brother. Nevertheless, Syme immediately detected a certain lack of enthusiasm. "You haven't a real appreciation for newspeak, Winston," he said almost sadly. "Even when you write it, you're still thinking in old speak. I've read some of those pieces that you write in the Times occasionally. They're good enough, but they're translations. But they are translations. In your heart, you'd prefer to stick to old speak with all the vagueness and in useless shades of meaning. You don't grasp the beauty and in the destruction of words. Do you know that newspeak is the only language in the world whose vocabulary gets smaller every year?" Winston did know that, of course. He smiled sympathetically. He hoped not, trusting himself to speak. Syme bit off another fragment of the dark-colored bread, chewed it briefly, and went on. "Don't you see that the whole aim of newspeak is to narrow the range of thought? In the end, we shall make thought crime literally impossible because there will be no words to which to express it. Every concept that can ever be needed will be expressed by exactly one word, with its meaning rigidly defined and all its subsidiary meanings rubbed out and forgotten. Already, in the 11th edition, we're not far from that point, but the process will still be continuing long after you and I are dead. Every year, fewer and fewer words, and the range of consciousness always a little smaller. Even now, of course, there's no reason or excuse for committing thought crime. It's merely a question of self-discipline, reality control. But in the end, there won't be any need even for that. The revolution, will be complete when the language is perfect. Newspeak is Ingsoc, and Ingsoc is Newspeak," he added, with a sort of mystical satisfaction. "Has it ever occurred to you, Winston, that by the year 2050, at the very latest, not a single human being will be alive who could understand such a conversation as we are having now? Except," began Winston doubtfully, and then stopped. It had been on the tip of his tongue to say, "except the proles," but he checked himself, not feeling fully certain that this remark was not in some way unorthodox. Syme, however, had divined what he was about to say. "The proles are not human beings," he said carelessly. "By 2050, earlier probably, all real knowledge of old speak will have disappeared. The whole literature of the past will have been destroyed. Chaucer, Shakespeare, Milton, Byron, they'll exist only in newspeak versions, not merely change into something different, but actually change into something contradictory of what they used to be. Even the literature of the party will change. Even the slogans will change. How could you have a slogan like 'freedom is slavery' when the concept of freedom has been abolished? The whole climate of thought will be different. In fact, there will be no thought at all as we understand it now. Orthodoxy means not thinking, not needing to think. Orthodoxy is unconsciousness." One of these days, thought Winston, with sudden deep conviction, Syme will be vaporized. He is too intelligent. He sees too clearly and speaks too plainly. The party does not like such people. One day he will disappear. It is written in his face. Winston had finished his bread and cheese. He turned a little sideways in his chair to drink his mug of coffee. At the table on his left, the man with the strident voice was still talking remorselessly away. A young woman, who was perhaps his secretary and who was sitting with her back to Winston, was listening to him and seemed to be eagerly agreeing with everything he had said. From time to time, Winston caught some such some such remark as, "I think you're so right. I do so agree with you," uttered in a youthful and rather silly feminine voice, but the other voice never stopped for an instant. Even when the girl was speaking, Winston knew the man by sight, though he knew no more about him than that he had held some important position in the fiction department. He was a man of about 30, with a muscular throat and a large, mobile mouth. His head was thrown back a little, and because of the angle at which he was sitting, his spectacles caught the light and presented to Winston two blank discs instead of eyes. What was slightly horrible was that from the stream of sound that poured out of his mouth, it was almost impossible to distinguish a single word. Just once, Winston caught a phrase, "complete and final elimination of Goldstein," jerked out very rapidly, and as it seemed, all in one piece, like a line of typecast solid. For the rest, it was just noise, a quack, quack, quacking, and yet there you could not actually hear what the man was saying. You could not be in any doubts about its general nature. He might be denouncing Goldstein and demanding sterner measures against thought criminals and saboteurs. He might be fulminating against the atrocities of the Eurasian army. He might be praising Big Brother or the heroes of the Malabar front. It made no difference. Whatever it was, you could be certain that every word of it was pure orthodoxy, pure ingsoc. As he watched the eyeless face with the jaw moving rapidly up and down, Winston had a curious feeling that this was not a real human being, but some kind of dummy. It was not the man's brain that was speaking, it was his larynx. The stuff that was coming out of him consisted of words, but it was not speech. It was the true sense. It was a noise uttered in unconsciousness, like the quacking of a duck. Syme had fallen silent for a moment, and with the handle of his spoon was tracing patterns in the puddle of stew. The voice from the other table quacked rapidly on, easily audible in spite of the surrounding din. "There is a word in Newspeak," said Syme. "I don't know whether you know it. Duck-speak, to quack like a duck. It is one of those interesting words that have two contradictory meanings applied to an opponent. It is abuse applied to someone you agree with. It is praise." Oh, so it's abuse and it's also praise, I get. Unquestionably, Syme will be vaporized, Winston thought again. He thought it with a kind of sadness, and although well knowing that Syme despised him and slightly disliked him, that was fully capable of denouncing him as a thought criminal, if he saw any reason for doing so, there was something subtly wrong with Syme. There was something that he lacked. Discretion, aloofness, a sort of saving stupidity. You could not say that he was unorthodox. He believed in the principles of ingsoc. He venerated Big Brother. He rejoiced over victories. He hated heretics, not merely with sincerity, but with a sort of restless zeal, and up to the dateness of information which the ordinary party member did not approach, yet a faint air of disreputability always clung to him. He said things that would have been better unsaid. He had read too many books. He frequented the Chestnut Tree Cafe, haunt of painters and musicians. There was no law, not even an unwritten law, against frequenting the Chestnut Tree Cafe, yet the place was somehow ill-omened. The old discredited leaders of the party had been used to gather there before they were finally purged. Goldstein himself, it was said, had sometimes been seen there. Years and decades ago, Syme's fate was not difficult to foresee, and yet it was a fact that if Syme grasped even for 3 seconds the nature of his Winston's secret opinions, he would betray him instantly to the thought police. So would anyone else, for that matter. But Syme, more than most, zeal was not enough. Orthodoxy was unconscious. Syme looked up. "Here comes Parsons," he said. Something in the tone of his voice seemed to add, "That bloody fool." Parsons, Wilson's fellow tenant at Victory Mansions, was in fact threading his way across the room, a tubby, middle-sized man with fair hair and a frog-like face. At 35, he was already putting on rolls of fat at neck and waistline, but his movements were brisk and boyish. His whole appearance was that of a little boy, grown large, so much so that though he was wearing the regulation overalls, it was almost impossible not to think of him as being dressed in the blue shorts, gray shirt, and red neckerchief of the spies. In visualizing him, one saw always a picture of dimpled knees and sleeves rolled back from pudgy forearms. Parsons did indeed invariably revert to shorts when a community hike or any other physical activity gave him an excuse for doing so. He greeted them both with a cheery "hello, hello," and sat down at the table, giving off an intense smell of sweat. Beads of moisture stood out all over his pink face. His powers of sweating were extraordinary. At the community center, you could always tell when he had been playing table tennis by the dampness of the bat handles. Syme had produced a strip of paper on which there was a long column of words and was studying it with an ink pencil between his fingers. "Look at him working away in the lunch hour," said Parsons, nudging Winston. "Keenness, eh? What's that you got there, old boy? Something a bit too brainy for me? I expect Smith, old boy. I'll tell you why I'm chasing you. It's that sub you forgot to give me." "Oh. Which sub is that?" said Winston, automatically feeling for money. "About a quarter of one's salary, and to be earmarked for voluntary subscriptions, which were so numerous that it had been difficult to keep track of them. For Hate Week, you know, the house-by-house fund I'm treasurer for our block. We're making an all-out effort. Going to put on a tremendous show, I tell you. It won't be my fault if old Victory Mansion doesn't have the big guest outfit of flags in the whole street. $2 you promised me." $2, okay. Ugh. Winston found and handed over 2 creased and filthy notes, which Parsons entered into a small notebook in the neat handwriting of the illiterate. "By the way, old boy," he said, "I hear that little beggar of mine let fly at you with that catapult yesterday. I gave him a good dressing down for it. In fact, I told him I'd take the catapult away if he does it again. I think he was a little upset at not going to the execution," said Winston. "Oh well, what I mean to say shows the right spirit. Doesn't it? Mischievous little beggars they are, both of them. But talk about keenness. All they think about is the spies and the war, of course. Do you know that little girl of mine did last Saturday? When her troop was on a hike out Berkhamsted way, she got 2 other girls to go with her, slip off from the hike, and spent the whole afternoon following a strange man. They kept on his trail for 2 hours, right through the woods, and then, when they got into Amersham, handed him over to the patrols." What did they do that for?" said Winston, somewhat taken aback. Parsons went on triumphantly. "My kid made sure he was some kind of enemy agent. might have been dropped by parachute, for instance. But here's the point, old boy. What do you think put her onto him in the first place? She spotted him wearing a funny kind of shoes, and she'd never seen anyone wearing shoes like that before. So the chances were he was a foreigner. Pretty smart of a nipper of 7. Oh. And what happened to the man? Said Winston. That I couldn't say, of course, but I wouldn't be altogether surprised if Parsons made the motion of aiming a rifle and clicking his tongue for the explosion. Good, said Syme abstractly, without looking up from his strip of paper. Of course you can't afford to take chances, agreed Winston dutifully. What I meant to say, there is a war on, said Parsons, as though in confirmation of this a trumpet call floated from the telescreen just above their heads. However, it was not the proclamation of a military victory this time, but merely an announcement from the Ministry of Plenty. Comrades, cried the eager, youthful voice. Attention, comrades. We have glorious news for you. We have won the battle for production. Returns now completed of the output of all classes of consumption goods show that the standard of living has risen by no less than 20% over the past year. All over Oceania. This morning there were irrepressible, spontaneous demonstrations when workers marched out of the factories and offices and paraded through the streets with banners voicing their gratitude to Big Brother for the new happy life which his wise leadership had bestowed upon us. Here are some of the completed figures. Foodstuffs. Okay, we are going to complete this in the next time. We made it to page 51. That's pretty good. Anyways, I'm going to see real quick to see. Oh yeah, we're still a few pages away from 6. Okay. Anyways, we have been reading George Orwell's 1984. If you like this content, make sure you like and subscribe and ring the bell so you know when I upload. And if you want to support me in any way, all that information will be in the description below. As always, thanks for watching, everyone, and have a great day.